Sometimes in life we don't want to believe that a loved one is truly gone, and so we try to keep them as close as possible. But when it comes to celebrity death, some may go a little bit too far. Join us as we have a look at some celebrities that may have actually faked or tried to fake their own death. Amelia Earhart. Now, in 1935, most women were just content in staying home and taking care of the children. But not Amelia Earhart. She had much bigger ambitions. Those included being the first person to fly solo from Hawaii to California. Well, her dreams didn't exactly stop there. She was planning to take a trip around the world along with her navigator, Fred Noonan. However, the two never arrived at Howland Island, located about 2,500 miles across the Pacific Ocean. They disappeared, almost as if into thin air, and never arrived for their scheduled refueling. Over the years, there have been plenty of theories that surround her death, including everything from paranormal activity to being eaten alive by giant coconut crabs after she was too weak to fight them off. However, in the 1970s, another idea would be tossed into the ring. Amelia Earhart may not be dead at all and may have actually survived the flight. Joe Kloss published a book titled Amelia Earhart Lives, where he claimed that she may have assumed a new name, then moved to New Jersey and began a new life for herself. And out of everywhere that you could begin a new life for yourself, why would you choose New Jersey? Anyways, Kloss believed that Earhart was actually Irene Bolam. She was a former pilot who was acquainted with Earhart before her death, and the two looked eerily similar, and so it would be easy to mix them up. Irene Bolam disputed Kloss's allegations, taking him to court for a whopping $1.5 million settlement. The book would then be withdrawn by the publisher. And apparently the author didn't know that just because you look like someone doesn't mean you are that person. Jesse James. Jesse James was one of America's most famous bandits, and for 1882, that's saying a lot, since there probably weren't a lot of televisions and radios back then. You know, most information would have to come from newspapers or word of mouth. It's widely believed that in his most famous stick-up, he falsely claimed that he was a Wild West Robin Hood, taking from the poor to give to the rich. Most of this was actually made up by James himself, and he would do so by writing a letter to a newspaper explaining why he shot and killed a bank cashier, because it would make him a public outlaw. James believed that the cashier was Samuel Cox, a commander of a pro-Union militia troop who murdered a guerrilla leader by the name of Bloody Bill Anderson. And yes, that's right, Jesse James was part of the Confederate guerrillas, also known as the Bushwhackers. These men would carry out attacks on any Union sympathizers within their region, and most of the violence that began stemmed from his participation in this group, and he was following in his brother's footsteps. But then there was a lot of mystery that shrouded over Jesse James's eventual death. It's believed that in 1882, Robert Ford shot Jesse James in his rented home in St. Joseph, Missouri, while his wife and child were in another room. Some, however, have speculated that it wasn't Jesse that the man shot, but instead his cousin. One man was such a fan of Jesse James that he killed Robert Ford on a personal vendetta in order to avenge the famous outlaw. As the story goes, Edward O'Kelly followed Bob Ford to Creede, Colorado in 1892 with a loaded double-barrel shotgun. He then entered Ford's saloon and said, "Hello, Bob," right before killing him instantly. O'Kelly would then be sentenced to life in prison, but was released in 1902 after there was a 7,000 signature petition in favor of his release. It would make sense why Jesse James would want to fake his own death. Can you really blame him with that kind of justice? Elvis Presley. Fans of Elvis Presley firmly believe that the king could do just about anything he wanted, even fake his own death to live a life of secrecy. There's been quite a bit of mystery surrounding the death of Elvis, including the fact that originally his cause of death was marked as an irregular heartbeat, which could only be a condition diagnosed in the living. This was later changed to accidental overdose, and then in 2010, one of Elvis's doctors said that the legendary singer died of an untreated constipation problem. However, the biggest mystery of all is Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, who would order that the autopsy and death certificate of his son be kept private until the year 2027. This would mark 50 years after the death of the king, and means that we only have 10 more years left to see what may or may not have actually happened. People want to believe so badly that the singer has not, in fact, left the building, that a group was created in 1989 called the Elvis Sighting Society. Now look, anything's possible, and if the king is alive out there somewhere, we hope he's enjoying a fried peanut butter and banana sandwich. Michael Jackson. Going from the king of rock and roll, we go to the king of pop. And if you've heard the name Michael Jackson, you can easily pair it up with the word eccentricity. Michael Jackson believed in the idea of Neverland and living forever, and even owned a ranch called the Neverland Ranch. But Michael Jackson did have some dark secrets in his final months, or so that's what the media would like you to believe. On June 25th of 2009, Michael Jackson died of a drug overdose. But here's the real kicker. Jackson had been facing some exuberant debt, and he even knew the exact way that he would die years before it happened. It's as if this was all just a ruse, because after all, as much as Michael Jackson hated to be alone, he still loved the spotlight. He was exactly the type of person that would fake his own death to see how the world would react. There were a number of strange occurrences that surrounded his death, including the fact that after he died, his family immediately moved all of his belongings, including his bed sheets. The police also came to investigate his rented house and said that they found IVs and drugs scattered about the residence, but that the house had been cleaned out prior to this. Another strange occurrence was that Michael Jackson was also good friends with Deepak Chopra. He was a vegetarian and only ate one meal a day in what he thought would prolong his life. Jackson also did yoga and meditation. He had been cleared on a good bill of health just months prior to his death and had only been assigned a cardiac doctor 11 days before dying. Jackson was so obsessed with the fact that Elizabeth Taylor faked illnesses and disease for media attention that he did so in his final months, claiming to be in a wheelchair and also suffering from numerous lung transplants. But the most bizarre part of everything is that his family refused to have an open casket funeral, as if they were even in on the whole thing themselves. And Michael Jackson's music is now selling at record numbers, which would erase any potential debt that he or his family had ever accumulated. Maybe Michael Jackson really meant "You Can Never Kill Me" in his hit song "They Don't Care About Us." Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was one of those comedians that would surely be able to get the last laugh, even if that meant faking his own death. There's no doubt that as far as comedy genius goes, Andy Kaufman was one of the best. Quite often, it was hard to distinguish his comedic personas from his actual identity. That's because he did them so well, and would even get in character off stage as well. Now, it's not too far-fetched to believe that Andy is actually alive, and the rumors might actually be true, or it could just be a hoax played off by the comedian's brother. One of the most intriguing arguments of Andy Kaufman's death is that he wanted to step out of the spotlight. He often spoke about how faking his own death would be a grand hoax, and that his death would even spur appearances of the famous character, Tony Clifton, who was also played by his friend Bob Zmuda. One interesting point to note here is that Kaufman actually loved disguises, and it wouldn't seem far-fetched for him to actually interact with audiences as one of his favorite personas. And there's even been a blog that was released 20 years after Andy's death claiming that he's still alive, and the author of the blog itself. The blogger claims that he's been working on a lot of new characters over the last 20 years to disguise himself as. And which one's my favorite? It's the aging comedy legend who still thinks everyone recognizes him. So don't be surprised if Andy Kaufman really is alive out there somewhere doing what he loves, sharing his rare form of comedy with his fans that can also double as a performance art spectacle. Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey was part of the Beat generation and the hippies, which meant that in order for him to write the way that he did, there would be a lot of illegal muses that had to be consumed. He was famous for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and hosted plenty of parties known as acid tests, which integrated LSD with multimedia performances. However, a little-known fact was that he actually mentored the Grateful Dead, who just happened to be one of the house bands at these acid test parties. Kesey knew that he would be wanted by the police soon enough, so he faked his suicide with the help of his friends. His friends left his truck on a cliffside near a road in Eureka with a handwritten suicide note. In the note, it stated, "Ocean, ocean, I'll beat you in the end." He then fled to Mexico and returned to the United States after 8 months, being caught and arrested by the police for possession of marijuana in 1965. But who knows what kind of literary masterpieces the world missed out on for that short incarceration. Marilyn Monroe. If Marilyn Monroe was anything, she was mysterious, enchanting, and beautiful. She was often forced to play vapid, dumb blonde characters for Hollywood, but most of the people that she met liked to say that there was more than a pretty face that met the eye. She was interested in intellectuals and wanted to have a family more than anything else in the world, although she had multiple abortions and miscarriages. She lived a fairly lonely life, being orphaned and never really having a family. Her mother was put into a mental institution when she was a child at a very young age, and she often feared that it would happen to her as well. Marilyn Monroe's death was another mysterious celebrity death that rocked America. She was found in her home in Los Angeles, and her death would be ruled as suicide. People just couldn't understand why such a talented and beautiful actress would possibly want to commit suicide. And so, rumors began to circulate about foul play. This would also occur around the same time that Monroe would threaten to come out about her relationship with the Kennedy brothers. There's even speculation that the Kennedy brothers, who were afraid that Marilyn would ruin their reputations and marriages, helped her to plan her own death and escape the public eye, because she's apparently been spotted in Hawaii at the age of 85. Although we can never be certain as to what to believe, we definitely think that if you're going to fake your own death to escape the paparazzi, you couldn't get any more remote or tropical than a Hawaiian island. Many times it's hard to separate fact from fiction, but in the case of celebrity deaths that are faked, the lines become even more blurred. What are some celebrity deaths that you can't believe could possibly be true? Share your reasons in the comments below, and thanks for watching. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was found dead on August 5th of 1962 in her home in Los Angeles after having overdosed on barbiturates. Playboy's first ever Sweetheart of the Month suffered from mental illness along with substance abuse, which stopped her from acting and producing movies.